U.S. President Donald Trump promises $639 million in aid to feed people in Somalia, South Sudan, Nigeria, and Yemen. World leaders wrap up meetings at the G20 summit amid violent public protests. And Madonna's dream for Malawi is becoming a reality. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Haiti Adams-Fitzpatrick in for Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The United Nations World Food Programme says the Trump administration's promise of $639 million in aid to Somalia, South Sudan, Nigeria and Yemen is a godsend. U.S. President Donald Trump made the pledge during the G20 summit of world leaders in Hamburg at the weekend. The announcement came after the Trump administration proposed sharp cuts in funding for the U.S. State Department and other humanitarian missions as part of its America First policy. In a statement, the World Food Programme's David Beasley says the U.S. funding was about 1/3 of what the UN agency estimates would be required this year to deal with urgent food needs in these and other affected countries. He hailed German Chancellor Angela Merkel as G20 host for putting Africa and the looming famines on the world's agenda. The U.S. funding brings to over $1.8 billion in aid promised by the United States for the 2017 fiscal year to address the crises in the 4 countries where the UN now estimates more than 30 million people need urgent food assistance. The head of the Electoral Commission in the Democratic Republic of Congo says it's not possible to organize presidential elections by the end of this year. The move could violate a political agreement with the opposition, which has long accused President Joseph Kabila of clinging to power. Kabila's refusal to step down at the end of his second elected term in December last year sparked protests that left dozens of people dead. The violence helped to push the government and the opposition into a December 31st deal that calls for the vote to be held this year without Kabila as a candidate. The opposition has denounced the Electoral Commission's announcement as a, quote, declaration of war. The country's main opposition bloc has promised a full response on Monday. Well, barely a month before elections in Kenya, the country's president and chief justice appear to be at odds. Trouble started when President Uhuru Kenyatta responded to the opposition's court victory against the country's Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. This follows Friday's High Court ruling that a contract to print ballot papers for the presidential election was not awarded transparently. The opposition has already brought a flurry of cases against the Electoral Commission. In his response, Kenyatta cautioned against using the court process to delay the elections. But Chief Justice David Maraga fired back, warning Kenyatta not to undermine public confidence in the judiciary. Memories are still fresh in Kenya of the violence that followed the disputed 2007 elections. More than 1,200 people died, and some fear the country might see a repeat after next month's polls, in which Kenyatta is seeking a second and final term. Well, as Kenyans prepare to go to the polls to vote at all levels of government, there is something different on the ballot this year, a surge in the number of independent candidates. A quarter of the more than 15,000 people cleared to run for office by the Electoral Commission are independents. Lenny Ruvaga is in Nairobi for us with more.
The governorship of Nairobi County is among the most hotly contested races this year, given the importance of the capital. Peter Kenneth is one of 5 candidates challenging the incumbent for the seat. 3 of them, including Kenneth, are running as independents. The former MP ran for president in 2013 under the banner of the Kenya National Congress, but he didn't make the cut during this year's primaries.
The big parties conspire against individuals, but I think you can see with this particular sham, it was across the board many of the leading political parties. So you have more independent candidates than the political parties have. And what will be a lasting ramifications is that in future people will not go for party nominations.
That remains to be seen. These are only the second nationwide elections since 2010, when Kenya's new constitution allowed people to run as independents. Some voters are embracing the added choice.
It's not about party, because at the end of the day, party will not solve out my issues. I have to look at a leader who can look at the nature of the young people, a leader who can fight for the environment, education, security.
Another gubernatorial candidate for Nairobi County, Miguna, goes door to door to sell his policies. He notes that being independent comes with its own challenges.
The first major challenge, obviously, is that changing a people's mindset takes a lot of effort and time. And we just had the Constitution ratified in 2010. Secondly, the so-called established parties, which are fictional constructs, unfortunately have a lot of money.
The ruling Jubilee coalition and the opposition National Super Alliance continue to dominate the political landscape. But this year's primaries were plagued with allegations of irregularities and favoritism, leading to court challenges. The governor of Kiambu County, William Kabogo, broke off from Jubilee to run for re-election as an independent. He says the newly formed Kenya Alliance of Independent Candidates counts nearly 5,000 members.
People are beginning to now think about candidates and not forums, not parties, not euphoria. And if this happens successfully in terms of the number of people we get into parliament or the number of people who will succeed in this general election having participated as independent candidates, then that will create a different level in terms of how mature we are in electioneering.
Kenyans will have their say at the polls August 8th. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi.
Measles was officially wiped out in the United States 17 years ago. But outbreaks still happen, especially when someone carries the virus back from a country where it still circulates. The northern U.S. state of Minnesota is battling the biggest outbreak of measles since 1990, and state health officials are hoping it is now tapering off. 78 people have caught the disease and nearly a third have been hospitalized. VOA's Carol Pearson reports.
Minnesota's Somali American community is tight-knit. At one time, they had the highest rates of vaccinations against measles than any other group in the state. Then they heard this.
Autism is caused by vaccines if administered under 3 years of life.
Then the number of Somali American children getting vaccinated for measles, mumps, and rubella, the MMR vaccine, plummeted.
I would say almost exclusively the whole responsibility lands on the anti-vaccine movement. And the reason is misinformation and myths spread about a link between MMR and autism, which there is none, and science has proven that not to be true.
Patsy Stinchfield spoke to us via Skype. She is a nurse specializing in infectious disease. Stinchfield says the Somali Americans came together quickly to hold community meetings, allowing doctors to talk about the safety and effectiveness of the measles vaccine. Then they did a complete shift in getting to clinics to get their children vaccinated.
Since the outbreak, the message has gotten out that measles, mumps, rubella vaccine is safe, it's effective, and typically in a week in Hennepin County, which is a Minneapolis county, there'd be 500 MMRs given. And for 3 weeks in a row, there were 3,000 MMRs given each week for 3 weeks in a row. So that's a tremendous response.
Stinchfield said measles took the community by surprise.
They did not think that measles would be in the United States. And so the level of fear was greater for autism. That has now shifted, that the level of fear for measles is great because these families know measles. They've had loved ones die of measles in Somalia.
Fortunately, no one who caught measles in Minnesota had any serious complications. State officials are hoping to declare the outbreak over by the end of July. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
Now, Voice of America and Africa 54 host Vincent McCory held a town hall Saturday in Minnesota, home to a large Somali American population, to discuss the recent outbreak of measles in the state and address rumors in that community around childhood vaccines and autism. The panel gathered to address concerns of parents and featured 4 Minnesota health officials, 2 of whom have children who have been diagnosed with autism. The event, called Vaccine and Autism, Myths and Facts, was brought broadcast from the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Moving on to other news now. U.S. President Donald Trump has pledged to boost exports of American liquefied natural gas to Central Europe, challenging Russia's dominance in the market. Many European countries are accusing Moscow of using energy as a political tool. As Henry Ridgwell tells us, analysts say the United States and Russia are now on a collision course over energy supplies to the region.
President Trump put gas at the top of the business agenda in Poland.
And America stands ready to help Poland and other European nations diversify their energy supplies so that you can never be held hostage to a single supplier.
Up to now, that supplier has been Russia. State-owned Russian firm Gazprom shut off pipelines to Ukraine in 2015, depriving Kiev of a major source of revenue and disrupting supplies to Eastern Europe.
It's a key pillar of Russian foreign policy, of using gas and energy as a means of asserting dominance over Central Europe.
The first shipment of American liquefied natural gas arrived in Poland last month, and the country hopes to become an LNG hub. To that end, the Three Seas Initiative Summit in Warsaw Thursday brought together leaders from a dozen Eastern European nations, plus President Trump. He pledged the United States will never use energy as a political tool. Energy analyst Gregor Malecki, a former head of Poland's foreign intelligence agency, says Russia will be watching with interest.
If this new source of gas supplies is moved forward and the infrastructure built, it may cause Russia to change its approach. The Polish government is probably counting on it. Russia may change its politics towards Poland regarding energy.
But Russia has plans of its own. Initially scheduled to open in 2019, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline would double its capacity to export gas directly to Germany, bypassing Ukraine. Eastern European states want the project blocked.
If we want to have United States LNG supplies in Central Europe, we also want to see the United States getting tough on Nord Stream 2, which means getting tough on Russia.
If the American LNG deal goes through, analysts in Washington say it could have a broader impact on US-Russia relations.
I think it could all happen relatively quickly and in a way that I think will give us much stronger leverage over Putin and the Russians to begin pushing back against some of their more aggressive activities that we've seen not only in Europe but against the United States as well.
President Trump remains upbeat about his relationship with President Putin, but the evolving energy policies in Europe will likely remain a source of friction. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, Warsaw.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover here. So join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so do check us out and share our show with your friends. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, the G20 summit wraps amid violent protests. Stay with us.
My name's Carla Babb, and I work the Pentagon Beat. That access helps me to do better stories. Every day it's my responsibility to collect all of the defense news. It keeps our VOA viewers informed. I get to travel all across the globe. Anything that's defense related and how to protect and keep people safe, that's where I'll go. So it's never a dull moment at the Pentagon. My name is Carla Babb. This is my beat.
I'm Millar Sega. I'm the host of VOA's The Correspondents, a roundup of the world's top stories with analysis from our dedicated reporters. It's really a conversation the same way that you would bring a friend to your home and ask them what's going on. And our correspondents will do that and answer those questions through their own eyes.
That appears a false choice in more ways than one.
We can't actually put you there, but we can come pretty close. In 30 minutes, we'll show you the world.
Welcome back. In a string of Twitter comments after returning to Washington from the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany, President Donald Trump says he twice strongly pressed Russian President Vladimir Putin about Russia's meddling in last year's U.S. election. He says it's now time to, quote, move forward in working constructively with Moscow. President Trump also noted that Mr. Putin vehemently denied any interference in the election. But White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus told Fox News that Trump, quote, absolutely did not believe Putin's denial of the election meddling.
What the president did is he immediately came into the meeting, talked about Russian meddling in the U.S. election, went after that issue at least 2 separate times. This was not just a 5-minute piece of the conversation. This was an extensive portion of the meeting, and after going at it with President Putin more than once, 2 times, maybe even 3 times, the president at that point, after spending a large part of the meeting on the subject, moved on to other topics.
Well, Trump also said he and Putin discussed forming a joint cybersecurity unit so that election hacking will be guarded and safe. Key Republican lawmakers ridiculed the idea of working with the Russians. Senator Lindsey Graham said it was close to, quote, the dumbest idea I've ever heard. By the end of the day Sunday, Trump had backtracked on his push for the cybersecurity unit, tweeting that he does not think it could happen. Now, the Trump administration is facing months of investigations amid allegations that the president's campaign colluded with Russian officials to help him win the White House, and that the president possibly obstructed justice by firing James Comey, then the director of the FBI, while he was leading the agency's Russia investigation. Numerous congressional probes are underway now, as is a criminal investigation headed by special counsel Robert Mueller, another former FBI chief. Well, the G20 summit of the world's richest economies wrapped up Saturday against a backdrop of angry protests and a pledge by leaders to fight protectionism in the face of President Trump's America First policy and Brexit. Mr. Trump took center stage at the 2-day gathering. His meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin was the major headline. VOA's Europe correspondent Luis Ramirez has the details.
The last day was long and filled with difficult meetings in a difficult setting.
It's been really incredible the way things have been handled, and nothing's easy, but so professionally and without much interruption, despite quite a few people. And they seem to follow your G20s around. But you have been amazing, and you have done a fantastic job. And thank you very much, Chancellor. Incredible.
Anti-capitalist demonstrators intensified their protests, burning, looting, and trying to block access to the G20 venue. Police estimated 100,000 people were on Hamburg streets Saturday. Authorities were ready with water cannons and thousands of reinforcements. British Prime Minister Theresa May got her time with the U.S. leader after being pushed off the schedule Friday, when Trump's meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the main event at this G20, went long. It was a cordial and warm meeting. Putin and other Russian officials affirmed their opinion that Trump believed Putin when the Russian leader said Moscow did not meddle in U.S. elections.
President Trump said that he heard firm assertions from President Putin that it is not true and that Russian authorities have not meddled in these elections, and that he said that he accepts these assertions. That's it.
At the end of the summit, Putin himself took the question.
You have to ask about President Trump's attitude to my answers and not what happened. Nothing was happening. We weren't meddling.
China's Xi Jinping was Trump's last meeting of the day. North Korea was a top issue. G20 leaders, nervous about Trump's America First policy and Brexit, sought to counter what they perceive as a growing wave of isolationism among the main players. In their final communique, they agreed to work against protectionism. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, Hamburg.
Well, back home, President Trump's encounter with Russian President Vladimir Putin continues to draw sharp reactions from U.S. lawmakers across the political spectrum. VOA's Michael Bowman has more.
Hours after returning to the White House, President Donald Trump took to Twitter to suggest that he and President Vladimir Putin have put Russian election meddling in the rearview mirror. Trump noted Putin's denials of any Russian misdeeds, wrote, "It is time to move forward in working constructively with Russia," and announced plans for a joint U.S.-Russian cybersecurity initiative.
I think the trip overall was just an outstanding success.
Administration officials say Trump and Putin had a long and fruitful dialogue.
Look at what was discussed and what was accomplished. He fully addressed the election situation. He focused on the ceasefire in Syria, which is a major accomplishment. He talked about Ukraine, and he talked about North Korea.
On Twitter, Republican Senator Marco Rubio compared partnering with Putin on cybersecurity to partnering with Syria's president on controlling chemical weapons. Among Democrats, Congressman Adam Schiff tweeted that Trump had undermined America's position by questioning U.S. intelligence on Russian election meddling before meeting with Putin. Senator Mark Warner stressed the need to strengthen, not relax, U.S. sanctions against Russia. Trump's critics are missing the big picture, according to administration officials.
We have some very serious issues to deal with, which are Syria, a ceasefire, that's in both of our interests, and having a no-fly zone, dealing with the issues in the Ukraine, which are very important, dealing with North Korea and the ballistic missile. That's what the president is focused on.
Congress is getting back to work after a week-long recess with health care reform at the top of the Republican to-do list. A push to repeal and replace Obamacare has stalled, and without it, other Republican priorities like tax reform become more difficult. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has praised the Turkish people for resisting last year's attempted coup against the government of President Recep Erdogan without mentioning the government's crackdown on suspected plotters. Tillerson visited Ukraine and Turkey after attending the G20 summit. VOA's Latita Hoke reports.
While in Turkey on Sunday, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson attended the World Petroleum Congress, where he was presented an award for his past leadership of the ExxonMobil Corporation. The visit comes as Ankara prepares to mark the first anniversary of a failed coup.
We're all here in Istanbul at a momentous time. Nearly a year ago, the Turkish people, brave men and women, stood up against coup plotters and defended their democracy.
Tillerson honored some 240 victims that died on the night of the coup, but he made no mention of the subsequent crackdown on suspected plotters. The Turkish government dismissed or suspended from work more than 100,000 people and arrested about 40,000 others. Later in the day, Tillerson met with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The meeting comes just weeks after the U.S. State Department issued a statement condemning the violence outside the Turkish embassy in Washington in May. Turkish security guards clashed with anti-Erdogan protesters, injuring several people. U.S. police subsequently issued an arrest warrant for 16 people, including 12 Turkish security officials. Tillerson arrived in Turkey after a stop in Ukraine, where he called on Russia to stop its aggression against that country.
I think it is important to be very clear on what our goals are, the United States' goals are, with respect to the situation here. And first and foremost, it is to restore Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and integrity.
The top U.S. diplomat said EU and U.S. sanctions will remain in place until Moscow reverses the actions that trigger them. His visit to Kyiv comes just 2 days after U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin had their first face-to-face meeting at the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. Russia's interference in the U.S. presidential election was one of the topics.
The point was made that this is an issue that really has the American people quite concerned.
But Tillerson said cybersecurity is a complex issue that requires international cooperation. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come here on Africa 54. A children's hospital funded by Madonna prepares to open in Malawi. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Madagascar, police forces dispersed hundreds of protesters as they march in the capital to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Tim Party. In Nigeria, flooding throughout the city of Lagos after days of heavy rain. We stay in Nigeria, where many women at the Bakassi camp for internally displaced people seeking sanctuary from Boko Haram receive contraception and use of the maternity ward in the women's center. Finally, in Niger, Abdulrazak Isufu Alfaga, the Taekwondo champion, is named UNICEF's Goodwill Ambassador on Friday. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Let's take a look at what's trending this Monday. Pop superstar Madonna says a children's wing at a hospital in Malawi she has been building for 2 years has completed its first surgery and will officially open on July 11th. The children's wing was named after the singer's 11-year-old daughter, Mercy. Madonna's charity, Raising Malawi, has built schools in that country and has funded the new pediatric unit, which began construction in 2015. Madonna visited the site last year. The children's unit includes 3 operating rooms dedicated to children's surgery, a day clinic and a 45-bed ward. There's also a playroom, an outdoor play structure and inspirational murals curated by Madonna and other artists. Well, the 12th edition of Festa 2H got underway in Dakar, Senegal, as the city vibrated to the sound of hip-hop and urban music and dance. Organized by an initiative called Africulturban, the festival reaches up to 20,000 local people and features artists from France, Belgium, Mali, the US, Canada and Spain. There's also an exchange program where experienced performers and dancers can share their skills with budding local hip-hop artists. The festival has survived more than a decade despite financial difficulties. Artistic director Amadou Falba estimates that the event gets on by no more than $68,000. And finally, wondering what snack to eat with your morning coffee? We've got a few ideas for you. How about nibbling on your coffee cup? A Bulgarian startup has developed a biodegradable wafer cup that's able to hold hot drinks. It's hoped that tasty creations will help cut waste too. The cup fee is made entirely of natural grain products. It doesn't change the taste of the drink and keeps crispy despite carrying hot beverages. Once the drink is finished, the wafer cup can be eaten or thrown away. It will decompose within a few weeks, we're told. And that is what is trending today. That coffee cup sounds awfully fattening. And that is our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. And for more news, tune into VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thank you so much for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a very good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Today's episode won't cost you anything.
Freebie.
Let's see what this one is about.
Anna, I love my job.
Oh yeah? Why is that?
I get so many freebies from the bands I write about. CDs, t-shirts, water bottles, even tickets to see them perform.
Wow. The only freebie I ever got from my